Hey out there, it's Sam here again, and back with another Overwatch gameplay for you to enjoy. Now today I wanted to talk about a few pieces of Overwatch news that I've read up on recently, and then I wanted to go into a bit of a how to play with Soldier 76, the character I'm using at the moment. Firstly, we have some new maps confirmed by the developer Blizzard, so 4 maps to be exact. The game director Jeff Kaplan made some comments on Twitch where he told some fans that the next Overwatch maps were in the pipeline, but not necessarily all 4 of those would be released. There's no confirmation about a date on when they would be released, but apparently they're relatively soon. Now on top of this, Blizzard has discussed a top 500 leaderboard that they're going to introduce for players who are skill level 60 and above. So they'll break that down into regions and platforms. So for example, top players in Europe on a PS4, they'll have their own top 500 leaderboard. And so will Australasia Xbox One players. They'll have their own leaderboard too. What do you get when you make it there? Apparently you get a special icon which is displayed next to your gamer tag in the game. And these leaderboards are going to be reset each month, just like their seasons are reset. So at the end of the season, anyone who made it into that top 500, doesn't matter if you stay there or not, you also get a new animated spray. So for me, I'm really holding out for those new maps. I really do enjoy the ones we have now, but a bit more variety is definitely what we need. So that's it for news, but now I wanted to go on to some good solid Overwatch character tips. In particular, I wanted to talk about Soldier 76 first. He's the first character you're introduced to when you go through the game's tutorial, and I think it's because he plays very similarly to characters in other first-person shooters. You know, compared to the other characters in Overwatch, he may seem a bit simple, but don't let that fool you. He's never a bad choice when you're on offense. Now, what are his weapons and abilities? Firstly, his standard weapon is a heavy pulse rifle. Now that's just a fully automatic rifle, and it has a relatively good sized magazine for you to shoot through. The rifle also has an alternative fire mode, which is the Helix rockets, and they're just a single burst of 3 rockets which do explosion damage on a small radius. Soldier's first ability is a sprint. Now sprinting is pretty standard in other first-person shooters, but it's actually quite unique in Overwatch. So it's a unique ability that Soldier has, and that really does help him to get back to the action a lot quicker. Soldier's secondary ability is his biotic field. Now that restores health to him and his teammates when they're inside the radius of the field as well. Finally, Soldier 76's ultimate ability is his tactical visor. Now you would have seen me use that maybe 10 seconds ago in the gameplay, but this is essentially a auto-aim feature where Soldier's reticle is expanded and any enemies within that reticle are automatically targeted for you. Now, what about some tips about using Soldier 76? Firstly, I'd have to say his sprint is extremely versatile. You can use it to get back to the fight quickly. You can also scope out the enemy team or even flank the enemy team. He's probably not the best character to flank with, but his sprint does get you around the edges a lot quicker and behind those enemy lines. Also, you can be willing to flank with Soldier because he can heal himself with that biotic field. So, you know, if you find yourself a good place to tuck away, set up your biotic field, you could sustain yourself almost for the whole match. Speaking of that biotic field, another good tip is that it's actually coming out of a device. So if you were to put it on, say, the payload that's next to me there, that would actually heal and move with the payload. So you could have the healing spot move with the payload as you move along. Now, a couple of suggestions for his tactical visor, his ultimate ability. Now, tactical visor immediately reloads your ammunition to its maximum capacity. So you want to try and rattle off anything you have left in the tank before you activate the skill. It also can only target one enemy at a time. So you want to make sure you focus your attention on the easier targets first. So you get the crosshair right in the middle, as close to them as possible, and then your aim will automatically go for them.
Round 1 complete. Switching side. Score 3-0.
The next hero I want to talk about is Hanzo. Now he is a defensive sniper, and he can be a somewhat difficult character to play as. His primary weapon here is his stormbow. Now with the stormbow you do have to charge up to get a longer shot, in saying that it also is a more powerful shot as well. His secondary or his special arrows is a scatter arrow. So the scatter arrow actually, once it hits a surface or a target, multiple arrows scatter out of it in multiple directions. His other arrow is a sonic arrow. Now the sonic arrow gives a sonic detection basically from the point where the arrow lands, and it can detect enemies in that area or location, just like I did there. So Hanzo's ultimate ability is a Dragon Strike. So he summons a spirit dragon, and that travels through the air in a line whichever direction he shoots his arrow, and that passes through walls and objects, and it damages enemies who are inside of that at all. Hanzo also has a passive ability, and that's Wall Climb. So that lets him climb or scale any vertical surface. All you need to do that is hold down the jump button. Now, what about some tips for using Hanzo? The first tip that I'd probably suggest is when you use your scatter arrow, it's really good for taking out enemies who are in cover, or who are tucked away somewhere. You can use the walls or objects around them to shoot the scatter arrow off, and then potentially hit them with one of the multiple arrows that comes off it. Now when the enemy or the attacking team is approaching a choke point, or a point where there's only one or two paths that they can follow to get through, that's when your sonic arrow can provide your team with a lot of information. Now if you have an enemy who is close to death and they're fleeing from you and they're quite close to you, you don't have to use your charged shots. You can still use like a non-charged normal arrow to finish off the job. Using a non-charged shot does mean that the damage isn't as high and the arrow doesn't travel as far. So you'll need to be aware of how close your enemy actually is to you before you decide to use that type of shot. Now I have a couple of tips for his ultimate ability, his Dragon Strike. Now if you're using it on your own, I would suggest you identify where your enemies are first. So use the sonic arrow to sort of get placement of where the enemy is, and then fire your Dragon Strike. If you're lucky enough to be playing with some friends, I would suggest you try and coordinate your Dragon Strike with their other abilities as well. So there are some characters who pin the opponents in their position. So if you were able to coordinate Dragon Strike with one of those other ultimate abilities, it would mean they're all in one location, or they're not going to move for your Dragon Strike to go through them. So there you go guys, just some tips I think are fairly useful for using Soldier 76 and also for using Hanzo. Now as for this gameplay, I thought my team was doing really well. We had a pretty good offensive session. We got through the first checkpoint pretty quickly, but now on defense we're not doing so flash, and the enemy is slowly making their way forward, and I think pretty soon I ended up changing up because Hanzo wasn't doing it for me anymore.
They're almost out of time. Hold on.
Yeah, I thought we were doing really well, because if you look at the time there, we got them down to, you know, the overtime at this checkpoint. But obviously they pulled through. You can always be so critical of your gameplay and your game techniques afterwards, can't you? You know, one very critical thing is I probably should have used my Dragon Strike a little earlier than I do just now. Also, another tip for the Dragon Strike: the dragon doesn't start immediately out of the arrow. There's a short distance between where Hanzo is and when the dragon actually comes out. So you see I didn't actually get a lot of kills in that last dragon strike, but that was because most of the enemies were really close to me. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Every Tuesday, New Zealand time, I'm going to be releasing a Overwatch video. I'm going to talk about my favourite characters. I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks as well for you on particular characters and try and get some good gameplay out there as well. My next video is going to be up on Thursday, once again New Zealand time, and it will showcase some of my favourite maps in all games that I've played. So what I want to do is show you guys some of the enjoyable maps and campaigns that I have enjoyed over my history of growing up a gamer. So thank you again for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you like and you're interested. Otherwise, have a great day and we'll see you next time.
Round